Hey, welcome to the Ministry Show. Pam and I are thrilled to be helping you enjoy your best year ever.
On the show, you've already heard Chris say that this is going to be your best year ever. We'll also be talking about your personal philosophy of ministry, how that affects everything that you do in ministry, especially how you lead. 3 questions to reveal your philosophy of ministry are something we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about, can you clarify the wind? What does that look like? When you clarify the win, then the people that you lead know if they've won or lost.
In order for you to have your best year ever, or me to have my best year ever, there are lots of different components that are part of that, especially in ministry. We're going to talk about the 5 habits of thriving ministry, value of volunteers, creating massive momentum, a bunch of things like that. Before we get into the operational effectiveness of ministry, there's one subject matter that we have to cover first, and that is your philosophy of ministry. And so we're entitling this show, The Art of Setting Your Sail. The truth of the matter is, the winds of ministry blow on us all. There's cultural aspects to ministry, the country that we live in, the freedoms that we enjoy. That kind of is blowing on us all. Your philosophy of ministry is likened to the setting of the sail to the wind. So it doesn't matter if it's a good wind, a bad wind, an indifferent wind, a wind that you might not prefer. It's the set of your sail that will propel you in ministry. Why is that so important? It's because of this. If we have a flawed philosophy of ministry, or perhaps even a naive philosophy of ministry, then Pam and I can talk to you about tactics and strategies that not only have worked for us, but work for others. Those tactics and strategies will not stick to a philosophy that's flawed or perhaps naive. Pam, you and I were talking the other day, and you gave me permission to tell this story, so I'll tell it. Well, my brother Jeff and I were on a lake, Lake Madison in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, decades ago. It's the closest to death I've ever been in my life. And we were out sailing. And I was teaching my brother to sail on a windy, blustery day. And for South Dakota, that's like 15 to 25 mile an hour winds. In fact, it was such a bad day, there weren't other boats out on the water. But it was my only opportunity to teach Jeff because we lived in different towns. So we were out there, and sure enough, yeah, Pam, it happened. My brother, instead of turning into the wind, turned away from the wind, and that wind tipped us over instantly. And for about the next 2 hours, we were treading water. Fortunately, we did have our life vests on, but here's the point. If we don't set the sail properly to the winds that are happening in and around us, cultural and otherwise, then we can flip over and get wet, just like I did that day. Your philosophy of ministry is key, and I would say the key to your overall success in ministry, and it's the single biggest component of why you're at, where you're at in ministry today, no matter if you feel like you're struggling to survive, like I was in that lake that day, whether it's smooth sailing, whether you've had a modicum of success or grand success. So we want to talk about your personal philosophy of ministry.
What is your mind and your heart telling you? Your philosophy is made up by what is in your mind, what is in your heart, how people treat you, how you treat others. Even in our own country, we've seen 2 primary political parties based with 2 very different viewpoints.
You're going to get political on us now?
No, you see how quickly I went over that? This was a bad year for that. We're going to skip that. It was very evident in this election. Very 2 different viewpoints. But sometimes our philosophies get convoluted. There's things that can affect that as well. And our attitude within our heart will be expressed through our actions. We cannot fake it. People know what's in our heart. It's going to be expressed in how we treat them.
Boy, Pam, truer words have never been spoken. We cannot fake it.
No.
At least not for very long. You mentioned that our heart and our mind can be conflicted. I can remember back in my early days of ministry when this happened to me. I had the philosophy at one point that everybody should be able to do ministry and that God has a role and a responsibility for everyone in ministry. That's how I was taught. That's what I believed. That's what I had come up with. But I kept having failure after failure. I started feeling like I couldn't look at the guy in the mirror. I felt like such a failure. I think it was a Holy Spirit moment in my life, Pam, where it was like, well, wait a minute, let's just check this out. And the fact of the matter is, not everybody can be successful in ministry.
That's true.
And if you don't believe that, just a cursory reading of the Old or the New Testament, probably just about any book within it will show that not everybody can have success in ministry. So my philosophy once was get everybody involved. My philosophy now is focus on the few. It doesn't mean focus only on a few people, but it means focus on the few activities, the few people, and the few programs that bring the biggest return so that we can set ourselves up for success in the future. So I had a change in philosophy of ministry, but my mind and my heart were conflicted as that was going on because I have a shepherd's heart. I've been a pastor for 30-something years. Anyway, as that battle took place in my mind and my heart, I really had to reconcile that, oh, you know what? Not everybody can do ministry well. That's an example, at least in my own life. I'm sure you've had them. And those of you that are watching and listening, you've had conflict between your mind and your heart. Part of developing your personal philosophy of ministry is making sure that your mind and your heart are congruent. Because when they are, you can move forward fast and kind of furious in ministry. But when your mind and your heart are conflicted, in other words, you're not real sure of your philosophy, you get that deer in the headlight look often in ministry. And oh my gosh, that just kills us in ministry.
You've said something that I'd like for you to expand on a little bit. You've said, think of yourself with sober judgment. The Bible says, if whatever a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Expand a little bit on that. Do you think that that's how valuable is that in philosophy of ministry?
Well, I think it's super valuable. And Pam, thanks for bringing that up, because we have these instances where we think we're right, but we're just not sure.
Right.
We've seen something work out, or we've had something work out in our ministry, but yet our background, maybe the way we were raised, what we were taught at some ministry development camp or seminary or whatever it might be, is incongruent with what you're seeing actually take place. If you've ever read any books on ministry, which I know that you have, and your ministry experience is different than the book, that ever happened to you?
Oh, yeah.
Like all the time. Then we have to go with what the result is that's taking place in our ministry. And so when we do that, it kind of the fog can kind of lift.
Right.
I remember when that happened to me in small group ministry specifically. I won't go into the details of the story, but I actually had an author of a small group book tell me one time when I asked him, I can't get your book to work for me. How did it work in your group? And he looked at me, candid as could be. Chris, I've never been in a small group. Oh my goodness. I won't tell you what it took for the Holy Spirit to keep my hand from connecting with his jaw, but it was a lot. That's where I knew that the Holy Spirit was in my life. But my point is this. When it comes to your own personal philosophy of ministry, you are in charge of setting your sail.
Yeah.
That's it, period. The wind can come from hither and yon, read all the books, go to all the conferences, listen to everything. But you have to set your sail to that flow wind that is coming. What we want to do in the next few minutes now is just talk about understanding what your current philosophy of ministry is, because you can't adapt it very thoughtfully or very intentionally if you're not sure what your current philosophy of ministry is. So, Pam, what do you have to say on that?
So 3 questions to reveal your philosophy of ministry. One is, when you see it, you get emotional about it. And that's both positive emotion, negative emotion. What is it that when you see it, you get that emotion?
And that can happen in all kinds of cases. It's not just when you see it in ministry, but like when you see it in life. What kind of gets you going? And Pam, I like how you said both positively and negatively, because your philosophy is developed in the extremes. I know you've had a ton of experience with that.
Yeah, I have. I was sharing with you earlier this week that I think both positive and negative, even with ministry and experiences you've had in leaders that you've had the privilege of serving with. And sometimes the leaders that you don't want to model your life after, that maybe it's been a little bit of a stretch for you, they can teach you just as much. and it does affect your philosophy of ministry,
I was
whether
thinking,
good or bad.
yeah, I was thinking about even parenting.
Yeah.
If you're a parent, or if you want to be a parent at some point in life, or maybe you're a young adult and you're going, I'm finally away from my parents. We all develop a philosophy of child rearing based upon how we were raised.
Exactly. I'll never do that.
I never want to do that, or I always want to do this.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by, what do you get emotional about? What have you experienced that you get emotional about?
Right.
So the second question is, what do you really believe about people? So in your heart of hearts, can people do anything and everything? Or does it take a certain anointed person to do certain things? Does it take a certain skill set of person to do things? Or can people do anything or just about anything? Man, when we really dig into, what do you really believe about people? Truth be told, that Christianity's been going on for a lot longer than you and I have been around, Pam. And it's going to go on for a lot longer than when you and I depart the planet. Why am I talking? That's morbid. Anyway, what do you really believe about people? Who came before you to set the platform from which you minister on? Well, those people have platformed you. Who can you platform? Can they do it? And you can fill in the blank about it. When you see it, you get emotional about it. And can people do it or not? And then this final question.
If you could change one thing about how ministry happens in your world, what would it be? Do you believe that the Holy Spirit truly does work in the lives of people? And do you trust that the work of the Holy Spirit is happening in people's lives? Or do we want to get in there and try to manipulate or change, or resting in that assurance that the Holy Spirit is working in people's lives?
Now, later on in this show, we're going to give you about 10 minutes at the end to consider these 3 questions. They're self-revealing questions, and you may need some help with a person or two to help you navigate these questions. But the essence of it is this. Once you know your own philosophy, then you can determine if it's serving you well or not. Just like I articulated earlier, I had this notion of ministry. It was really a philosophy of ministry that everybody and anybody should have a ministry assignment. That affected me, and it affected the work that I did and the proficiency at which I got it done. I had to adjust my philosophy when I began to understand, well, I can't just have everybody do ministry. We know and understand that a lot better today. Who of you out there doesn't have some kind of vetting process for people who work with children at your church? Well, imagine not having that. How's that going to go over in your ministry? The important factor is this. Those questions will help you to reveal your philosophy of ministry. Once you know it, then you can step back and say, hey, is this philosophy serving me well or not? If it's not serving you well, then you can adjust your philosophy to what's really going on, who you really are as a person, and what your ministry context is. In other words, you can set your sail to the wind that's blowing on you.
Chris, how does a leader truly know if their philosophy is serving them well or not?
Oh, okay. Why don't you ask a harder question? Yeah, right. Well, one of the things that I look at are those close relationships that we have. How is that going for you? You have good communication. Can you push back on one another? Or do you always have to be right and somebody else always wrong? Or do you always have to be wrong and somebody else always right? Who is in charge of your time? Can just anybody put time on your calendar? Are you running frantically from one thing to another, not in control of your time? And this is probably the best one. Are you gaining the results that you had hoped for? Think back with me for a moment when you first got into ministry. We all get into this with idealistic expectations. I understand that. So I'm not talking about the grandiose ideal expectations, but those expectations that you're really like, man, I want to spend time doing this, that, or the other thing. Are the results that you are currently getting matching what you wanted in ministry? Well, if the answer to any of these questions is not what you want, well, then we need to begin to refine your own personal philosophy of ministry. How's that for a long answer to a short question?
It's really good, because I think when you ask anyone that question that's in ministry, kind of throws them back. Like I talked to you, I said, I kind of had a philosophy of ministry for children and families. And then I think I had a little bit different philosophy of ministry for volunteer teams. So same philosophy, but it had a little bit of a change in it. And I had to define that a little bit better.
Yeah, good. It goes better for you, doesn't it? Yeah, it sure does.
Sure does.
Well, hey, one action item you can do, I just want to mention that there's a book that our program manager here, Christy Weber, has recommended. Great book. It's by Andy Stanley. It's called The 7 Practices of Effective Ministry. If you're wondering about this philosophy of ministry and wondering what yours is, man, this will really help you dig down into it because it's an action-oriented book. You can read it. You can apply it specifically and directly to your ministry.
In order to have a thriving church, you have to have a thriving volunteer ministry.
We're talking about that next week.
And that's my
Isn't
passion.
that awesome?
Yes, I love it. It's my passion. Have to have it. So one of the things that I would ask, since we are going to be talking about that next week, is who's more valuable, a volunteer or a visitor?
Oh, that's a dirty question.
Yeah, it
Pam.
is.
Oh, my goodness. We're going to get into that
Think
next
on
week
these
for
things.
you. So you don't want to miss next week because we're going to answer the age-old question. Who's more valuable, a visitor or a volunteer?
Mm-hmm.
Listen, gang, we are so appreciative that you've decided to join us. Our whole reason for doing the ministry show is to help you in some way to enjoy your best year ever. Man, if this show is helping you, let other people know about it. If it's not helping you or there's items in here that don't help you, treat it as a smorgasbord. Pam may have said something that resonated. I may have said something that has resonated with you. Then grab that and work on it. The stuff that doesn't resonate with you, don't worry about it. And just leave it off to the side. We love you. We appreciate you. Thanks for being part of the ministry show. And we'll see you next week.